Hey everybody, it's Ken Davenport. I am back. Welcome to another episode of the Producer's Perspective Live. I'm in my office tonight. The award-winning playwright of The Inheritance and much, much more. He just made me laugh backstage, so you're going to love this episode. Matthew Lopez up next. Let's get to it, Mary. Hit that theme song.
We're getting the band back together, getting the boys who rock again. We're getting the band back together, rocking the face of a place that remembers when some punks from the suburbs lit the sky with too much reverb. We're getting the band back together.
Hey everybody, it's Ken Davenport. It's true, I am in my office. This is a brand new setup, which means something is going to go wrong technically. So just be prepared for that. It's going to happen, and it's all going to be Mary's fault. So just let's get ready for it. I'm here. I'm in an office. I've started coming. It's after Labor Day. I had to do something and sort of start the routine. I urge all of you to try to get back to some kind of routine in your life. It helps. It feels a little bit better. It feels like, okay, we're getting through this and we're going to get through this. Although I did do this literally while the theme song was playing, I haven't been outside, by the way, about 3 hours. While the theme song was playing, I reached down and I put some hand sanitizer on. I've washed my hands like 3 times, but I was like, oh, I'm going on for a live stream right now. I better sanitize. You find yourself over sanitizing? I do. I'll probably do it about 3 or 4 times during this episode. Fantastic episode coming up with Matthew Lopez. I've been trying to sit down with this amazing writer for a long time. Actually, we were going to do a podcast, and then this thing called the pandemic hit. And now I'm getting this opportunity. I'm very, very excited because he's a very, very serious playwright who made a crack. Yeah, he's like not me. He made me laugh backstage, and this is we've never met. This is one of those things that I love about what we're doing is these moments where I get to sit down with someone and share some time with someone I've never met. And already he's not at all what I expected him to be, which is great. We're going to have a good time. Welcome back to all of you watching. Alan Greenstein is in the house. Alan's in the house. Hello, Alan. Who else is here? Christina. So great. She named herself 3 times. Oh, yay. Love it. Just quote the Scottish tragedy and get over it. You mean Macbeth? Yeah, Macbeth. I produced Alan Cumming Macbeth. We got Macbeth all over this place. So welcome. Hello, Drew. Welcome back. Hope you've had a wonderful week. If you missed last week's episode, go back and check it out. A very, very inspirational episode with Sonia Taya, the choreographer. What a journey she has had starting in at rave clubs. I still really don't know what that means in Detroit. And then coming here to really take over Broadway from a choreographic perspective. Very inspiring discussion. Go back and check that out. All of our replays were on episode like 72 of this thing, Mary tells me. Episode 72. And we're going to keep on going. In fact, next week, Broadway leading man Will Swenson is going to join us. Les Mis, Hair, all those shows. He's going to be with us next week. He did a very special reading for me. He actually did 2 readings for me in the last year. Maybe we'll tease you with what's to come there. We got some news, some big news hit Broadway. Oh, it'll be very interesting to see what Matthew's thought is about this. We got some big news this week in that Ben Brantley, the chief, well, I guess he's the co-chief critic, they made that happen a couple years ago, of the New York Times, the drama critic, decided he was going to step down. Now, this really was fascinating to me because I did a podcast with Ben very early. And first of all, I never thought he'd be on the podcast. And he said, absolutely, I'll come on the podcast, which I just loved his willingness to do that. I learned 2 things on that podcast, which I urge you all to go listen. 1, he just loves the theater as much as any one of us. And 2, he says on the podcast, he's like never going to stop doing it. Never. So I found it very intriguing that he decided now that he was going to step down. But I have a feeling he did it for a very specific reason that I wrote about in a blog tribute to him, because honestly, he does love the theater as much as we do. And his theater making craft was being a critic. And again, we'll get more into this when Matthew steps on the line. What else we got going on? We told you about the lineup. Our big Theater Maker Summit is coming up. We're doing a big conference November 14th, 15th, and 16th. It's turning out to be a very special few days. So go check that. We have an incredible group of speakers, a very big group of speakers, and a very small graphic of those speakers, Mary. A very small, teeny tiny graphic, as my daughter would say. But we don't need teeny tiny graphics because we have a very, very big star of a writer on the show tonight. So let's just bring him on. He is the author of The Inheritance, The Whipping Man, The Legend of George McBride. He's won just about every playwriting award there is. Please welcome to the live stream, Matthew Lopez. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing as well as one can. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
It's a real treat to have you here. It's a real treat. It's a real pleasure. I'm glad we're finally getting to do this.
Yes, thank you.
So I have many, many questions for you. We'll start at the one that was I came up with just a few moments ago. What do you think about Ben Brantley stepping down?
Here's what I'll say. I think that 24 years is long enough for anybody to be doing anything in this business. I wish him well, and I am looking forward to discovering who will be the next person in that job.
What a very politically correct thing to say. What has been?
That's all you're gonna get out of me.
I don't remember the reviews he's done of your previous stuff. Has he? Do you have a?
No, I mean I've almost been. I was almost exclusively reviewed by Isherwood at the Times over the years. So my interaction with Brantley was almost exclusively as a reader and as a theater goer.
Wow.
But the funny thing is that when you're a theater artist, you go see these things anyway. So when the reviews are a little beside the point because you've got the tickets anyway, or you're gonna go see it anyway. And so it's hard to talk about in some ways because you rarely ever make your decisions on what you're going to see based on what the critics say. And usually what the critics say it just means it's the type of phone call or text you have to make to your friend the next morning. Congratulations! Yes, I told you it was going to be a hit. Or you know what? They don't know what they're talking about.
Or my favorite is what. Review? I didn't see anything.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, listen. Let's start at the beginning of your story. So, why playwriting? Why did you choose this art form and this craft to go after? What about it attracted you to it?
My very first exposure to theater was when I was 5 years old. When my parents took me. My family's from New York. I was raised in Florida. My parents took me when I was about 5 on a trip to visit family in New York. And on the same week, I'm about to age myself a bit, but the same week they took me to see Sandy Duncan in Peter Pan, which was not only the first Broadway show I ever saw, it was the very first piece of theater I ever saw. I was 5 and I'd never seen anything. And that, of course, was Peter Pan, and it was the Jerome Robbins production, and it was literally magic, and it hooked me. And then a few days later, they took me to see my Aunt Priscilla in Day in Hollywood, Night in Ukraine. And I think that 1-2 punch of being taught that theater is magic with the first show, and then being taught that actually you can do it because you have exposure to it in your family. Like it actually, what's amazing is that first production created the magic and the mystique of theater for me. And then a few days later, going backstage to visit Priscilla before the play and then after the show, it completely tore down the mystique for me and showed me everything behind the scenes. And it's absolutely without question that week in New York absolutely set the course for my life. And I thought, for the longest time, I thought I was going to be an actor. And I did like community theater in my hometown, and I went to college to study acting. And then I got to New York, and I realized that very quickly, thank God, I realized it very quickly, that the thing that one must do in order to have a viable acting career. The inordinate amount of patience and the thick skin that's required and the tirelessness, I just didn't possess. And actually, I just didn't want it badly enough. And I think if there's anything that you could ever tell a young actor coming up in this business is if you've got to want it more than anything in the world, because if you don't, it's just not going to be worth it, you know? And writing was always something I did in secret. Writing was always something I did sort of on the side. It was like, I think it was like an outlet, but never really, I didn't think at the time it was something that I actually could do. I think I had this idea in my head that writing was this sort of exalted thing that you have to be sort of one of the anointed in order to take part in, and I wasn't one of the anointed, and so therefore I just sort of kept it a secret. And I've since learned that that's not true. And
it is true. I mean, it just might be true. I know you when people say this, I'm
sure. The thing that was missing from my passion for acting began to be there so fully in my writing. There was nothing else I wanted to do. There was nothing else that I cared about. And I needed to do it. And I needed to share my work with people and my thoughts and my feelings. And so it really was this very graceful transition from actor to writer. And I never looked back. As a matter of fact, I got a phone call from my acting agent. I had an acting agent at the time, and he was letting me go as a client. He was dropping me as a client. And a few hours later, I got a phone call from a literary manager at Luna Stage, which is where I had my very first production. And she was like, we want to do a reading of a play of yours. And no, it was on the same day, hours apart. And it's just, you know, I mean, you don't need a better sign than that. And so really never looked back from there.
So how did you said you were doing it in secret. So when did you go public with this information? Like, were you really high? Like, were you nervous that you just
wasn't? No, I was afraid. I think I was afraid of being told I wasn't good at it because, you know, I had this sort of suspicion even at the beginning of my writing, where I kind of knew I didn't have it in me to be an actor for the long haul. And I think if I'd been told that I was not good at writing, I would have just been crushed because I couldn't conceive of what else I could do. And so I think I kept it a secret for a while because I just didn't want to let go of the hope that I could actually make a go of it. And I started to do it. I started to share my work in college. I shared it with professors. I shared it with friends. I got to New York and I started to share my work I sent a play to my Aunt Priscilla to read. I just needed a lot of validation at first. And actually the person who gave me the most validation actually was the most perfect person. I knew I didn't want to be an actor and I knew I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know how to do it. I got a copy of the theatrical index, you know, like, I don't know if they still do the theatrical index anymore, but in the back, they used to have all the names and phone numbers and addresses of people who worked in theater. And I did like a big mail merge and I sent letters to so many different people and saying, this is me, this is what I'm doing. If you want to meet with me, if you got something for me to do, I would love to meet with you. And I sent out maybe 120 letters and I got one response back and it was from Hal Prince. And and Hal Prince invited me to his office and I went to his office, which was that in and of itself was an amazing experience. And I sat down with him and he asked me what I wanted to do. And I told him, I want to be a writer. Should I go to graduate school? No, it's a waste of time, waste of money. Just start writing. And he gave me the number of 3 writers who he knew who said, you know, reach out to them, tell them I sent you. And if they need an assistant on anything, maybe they can hire you for something. And so I reached out to Alfred Ury, John Weidman, and Terrence McNally.
Tax all of them, all 3 of them.
Yeah, and Ury and Weidman didn't have anything coming up that they had anything for me to work on, but Terrence was doing a workshop of Man of No Importance, his musical with Lynn and Stephen, and he said, "Why don't you come and you can be my assistant?" Which, you know, didn't really mean anything, but just sort of hang out and watch what we do. And so I did for, I think, about 2 weeks. I just watched them, and Joe was the director of that, as well as the production that they eventually did. And I just watched them put a musical together for 2 weeks, and it was an incredible experience. And my pay for that was, at the end of this, he would read one of my plays. And so I remember bringing it to his apartment on Fifth Avenue, and he didn't want an email. He just like print it, bring it to me. And then I waited for a few weeks, and I got a voicemail from him in which it's funny. Terrence didn't actually wait to talk to me. He just left this like 5-minute long voicemail, which he, praise the work, critique the work, question things. I think you should do this. I think maybe you should think about that. I have a question about this. This is really good. This is really thing, and on and on and on. And then at the end of it, because we'd had a conversation, and I told him I wasn't sure if I was a writer or not. And at the end of the conversation, Terrence said to me, "But if you're wondering whether you're a writer, you are a writer, and you should keep writing." Oh. And that was a thing that. I swear to God, I don't think Terrence would have done this, but if Terrence had said to me, "You should go to dental school," I probably would have gone to dental school. Thankfully, he didn't do that, and he encouraged me, and that began a very close friendship with him. And it was the encouragement that I needed, and that was honestly, like I said, I just needed just the small bit of encouragement, and very well placed encouragement, and that was. I think it's funny looking back. It's like, well, if Terrence McNally tells me I'm a writer, I'll definitely do it, and all these other people are like, what am I, chopped liver? But as soon as Terrence saw me as a writer, that's all I needed. Yeah.
Look, that Hal Prince story is very familiar to me, because I have the same exact story. I mean, he was amazing. Really? Oh yeah, I literally can show you right now. I have to get off my headphones for 1 second. This on my wall is a letter that he wrote to me after I went to see him in his office, because I wrote him a letter and said, "Yeah, see, look, everybody."
That's beautiful.
And basically, he said kind of the same thing. He said to me, I pitched him like 1,000 different shows, because I said I wanted to be a creative producer. And just like you, Terrence, to you, he said, "Your ideas are on the mark." And I hang it up here, because I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you say. Yeah. And it's amazing how we all need just that little bit. We all go through, even today, this stuff. We all have imposter syndrome to some extent. I mean, sure. Listen, not to put you on the spot, but you've been so lauded as written one of the greatest plays of the century. Look, and you can see, and you like shook your head when you were backstage, and it made me laugh. Or you said like overlauded playwright or something like this. Even you with all of it, we have a bit of this imposter syndrome. So to hear something like that from Terrence, which is so well deserved, I'm sure meant the world.
Yeah, it is. And it's actually it was a lesson to me in so many ways. And I think the greatest lesson that Terrence left me was how to treat other writers, how to treat not just those who are younger than you and newer in the business than you, but how to treat your colleagues. Terrence really instilled in me this idea that if we do not move through our careers, and if we do not operate in this business with dignity and respect for others, then we're just we're not contributing anything to it. And it isn't just enough to put your play out there and then wait to get the reception. You must engage with the community in a healthy way. And anytime, as a result of that, I think anytime anyone's ever asked me to talk to students, whenever anybody reaches out to me, I to the best of my ability, I always make myself available, because if it weren't for Terrence, and listen, Terrence McNally was Terrence McNally at that point.
Yeah, right. Jesus.
He had been Terrence McNally for a long time. He didn't have to. I mean, Hal Prince didn't have to do that. John Weidman and Alfred Urey didn't have to return my phone calls, but they did. And Terrence McNally did not have to invite me into that room. He didn't have to read my play, and he certainly didn't have to leave that voicemail for me, but he did. And that generosity, not just of time, but of spirit. I think more than anything else is one of the earliest lessons I learned in this business, and it's the one I always remind myself of. So whenever I have these feelings of imposter syndrome, which are natural, or even if it isn't just imposter syndrome, it is just the certainty, okay, I might not be an imposter, but I'm going to fail on this one. It was really just that dignity that Terrence taught me, that as long as you hold on to in yourself and your dealings with others, you will ride through. Because Terrence had his share of disappointments and failures as well in his career, and and they were no less painful to him when they happened. But Terrence was beloved in this business, even when he was being prickly. Everybody has stories about Terrence being prickly. So I have Terrence stories about him.
I could tell some ragtime stories myself.
He carried himself with dignity, and he respected others, and I think that's the prime lesson I learned from him.
I also love that Hal hadn't read your work, right? But
no. I was starting to drop my Aunt Priscilla's name. I was no dummy. I was like, Lopez nephew. I don't know if that helped, but you got, like, when you're 23 and just starting out, you use everything you've got.
There's a bunch of us out there in the world that Hal did that too. I think he just he had a passion detector. He could just detect it in people that people were just they were gonna get really good at it if they weren't good at it at the moment.
What's funny is after my play Legend of George McBride was off Broadway, I heard from him again, and he said, "Come, it's been too long. Come to my office and let's have a check-in." And I actually didn't end up going into his office, but he was in Tokyo for a long time, and we just had a really great phone call one day. So it was also great because it wasn't just starting you off on the journey. It was like having a little check-in with him was great.
I love it. Well, rest in peace to both of those incredible mentors that you had. I want to shift gears to the inheritance, because I have to ask you, when you got this idea to do this piece, did you know the magnitude of the piece before you sat down to start writing it? Were you like, I'm going to dash off a 10-minute play, and then oh shit?
I definitely. I think there are plenty of people who would have the chutzpah to do that. I did not know what this thing was when I started. It really started with a very simple passion, which was that I really wanted to. I fell in love with Howard's End from a very early age. I was a teenager, and I had my mom take me to see the movie when it came out, because I was just sort of movie crazy, and I wanted to just sort of experience what people were talking about with this movie, and fell in love with the story. And my mother was a teacher, and she got me the book, and I read the book and fell in love with the book. And then I fell in love with Ian Forster, and then discovering later that Ian Forster was gay and closeted all his life. And it stirred it. And it was funny because I'm this Puerto Rican kid from Florida, and it's just sort of like, why Howard's End, why Ian Forster? There's like nothing that connects on the surface, the two of us, and really the answer, of course, is that it was only the surface that kept us apart, and our lives were very different. But the way that he talked about human hearts and the way people love and the way people fear, the way people grieve, the seeming impossibility of mobility between social classes. It really resonated with me, and I wanted to do something with it. And the idea really started very simply. It was just this idea of taking my favorite novel and the word queering it. I just wanted to do something that he wasn't able to do in his lifetime because he lived his life in the closet. And no, I didn't know that this thing was going to be. Listen, if I had, I never would have done it because it would have just been too daunting, and I didn't know it was going to be 2 parts when I started. I didn't know anything about it. All I had was, like you said with Hal, this passion. I'd written several plays, but none that I had just this burning desire to write such as this. And I was okay with it being something that only 6 people and my parents saw. It was never meant to be anything other than something that I just needed to write for myself. And as I started to work on it, the dimensions of it started to grow. I remember I remember delaying it for a long time. I just wasn't ready to write it. I knew I would be ready when I was ready, and I wasn't ready then. And then I had to go through some life stuff, and I had to just sort of, I think I had to just sort of live a little longer, and then I was ready. I just remember being in a place where I was suddenly knew I was ready to write it, and I sat down to write an outline. I started to outline it, and I had been taking notes for quite a while, and I was rereading the book, and I was like ready to outline, and I sat down, and in one afternoon I outlined what I thought was the first act. And it was like, 13 single space pages, which is not unusual for an outline if you're being thorough. And I sent it to a friend of mine, and I said, here's the first act of the play. Now, this outline, the first act of the play, brings you up to the exact point at which part 1 ends. But right at that point, I just thought it was like the first act of the play. And I sent it to my friend, and he was like, you're delusional. This is a 3-hour first act. There's no, like, you're writing a big play. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I know it's a lot of characters. And he goes, this is, and he just started breaking it down for me. It's like, this section right here is going to take you half an hour. This section, and I'm like, he's like, maybe you're writing a 2-part play. And I went to Elizabeth Williamson, who at the time was the associate artistic director at Hartford, who I was writing this as a commission for Hartford. And I sent her the outline, and I was like, do you think this is more than an hour and 10 minutes? And she's like, this is way more than an hour and 10 minutes. And that's really, and you know what, whenever I first got sort of permission to think in a much broader way with this thing, that's when really like the imagination started to pop. And I just, I really, I knew then that I could do things that you couldn't do in a 2-hour play, 2.5 hour, even a 3-hour long play. I could investigate things that you normally just never have time to do. And certainly the breadth of it allowed me to actually dive deeper into it. And then it became this wonderful challenge of just like really getting to write a lot. And I think, but it was really, it was self-revelatory. It as I was writing it, it showed me what it was, and what it could be, and how it expanded over time. But no, and again, as I was writing it, I was like, this is crazy. This is insane. Again, I was like, okay, maybe an audience of 10 plus my parents, and that's it. So no, I mean, the way people responded to it once I started sharing part 1 with people was just, it was unbelievable. I literally could not believe it.
And obviously unbelievable success on that side of the pond. You come over here, the review, everything. And you, unfortunately, when I always ask my guests this question, they're like, where were you when the virus hit the fan?
Oh, yeah.
And you were in the last few days of performances, right?
Yeah, we were at the beginning of our final week, and I wasn't meant to be there that day on that Wednesday, because I had just been there the whole weekend before, because Saturday before Hillary Clinton was at the show, and then the next day Pete Buttigieg and Chasten were at the show. So I was at the show a lot the weekend before, and I knew we were, I'd be at the show a lot the next weekend. So I figured I'd take a couple of days off, but I had a friend in town, and I went and met her at the end of part 1 on that Wednesday, March 11th. And you could just feel something in the air that day. You could, in the streets. That was the day the usher. I'm forgetting what show it was, but an usher had tested positive, and that was when a lot of people were talking about the cast of Moulin Rouge getting sick, and we had just you started to hear these things, and I would hear about other friends who were. You could just feel it, and you could feel it in the air around town. And so when I walked my friend back to the city, when I walked my friend back to the show for part 2, I just had this feeling, and I said, you know what, I'm going to stay and watch part 2 today, and because it was the final week, and because they were actually filming the show that day, there were like 7 cameras around the orchestra, and so they had a lot of seats blocked off, and I just sort of slipped in the back, and I sat like kind of little behind a camera guy, and I think later I talked to them, and the actors could kind of feel it too, and I don't know if the audience could feel it. They were an amazing audience. I mean, the astonishing thing is that the audience was just, it was, we've had some great audiences over the years, and this was, I think, in many ways the greatest audience we'd ever had that night. And I left and I texted Tom Curtihy, our producer, and I said, I think I just saw the final performance of Inheritance.
Oh.
And he said, I hope you're wrong, but I'm glad you were there today.
Mm.
And I could just, and actually I talked to some of the guys after the show, a few days later, and Andrew Burnap told me that he went back to his dressing room and he told Sam Levine and Kyle Solar, he says, I think we just did our last show. And oh my man, I wasn't expecting to get moved by that, but you could feel it. You could feel it. You could also feel, which was so beautiful in that theater, just so much love. There was so much love and so much gratitude in the audience. And we've always played to loving, embracing houses in all three productions. And in that audience that night, which was just filled to capacity, I think because what was sort of this fearful thing that was sort of encroaching, the audience really felt this great gratitude for being told a story that, without being about what we're going through right now, ended up somewhat being about what we were going through right now. Nobody could have planned that. And leaving the theater that day, I just sort of felt that was that. And you know what? Honestly, because it ended in such a way, it was. I'm fine with that. I'm really grateful that I was there and that we had that night. And then the next day, I found out, actually Stephen Daldry texted me at 10 in the morning telling me he's hearing things that maybe they're going to shut down the theaters. Tom confirmed that was probably going to happen. And then I think around 2 or 2:30 that afternoon, it was official. And the actors were allowed back to the theater to collect their things. Unlike other shows, we knew we weren't coming back. And so the Schuberts let them come in and take their things. And they said goodbye. And that was that.
Well, I'm sure that's a play that when the theater comes back will be done all over the world for a long, long time. You'll be able to slide into a seat at many, many productions all over the world, I'm sure. You talked about, you started to outline it. Can you just talk about your writing process? Because first of all, you trained yourself as a writer. You just started writing. You didn't go to Juilliard. You didn't do that thing, right? So
I applied to one graduate school and I didn't get in, and I was like, I'm not doing this again. This is a waste of time and money. I'm just gonna write. It was like Hal Prince was right. I'm just gonna, and I was so I was very impetuous. It was just,
or you were very right. That's the other
thing. In me, I was just like, this is stupid. Why do I do this?
Let's just make that graduate school really regret it. What school did you apply to that you didn't get into?
NYU. I did not get into NYU.
Of course.
And so I decided to start writing instead. And I'm grateful. Look, I think that I probably took the long route to all of it because of that. I had to sort of teach myself. I was very grateful that, my very first play, The Whipping Man, was done a lot before I got to New York, a really strange, circuitous route to New York. I mean, it premiered at Luna Stage in Montclair. It was done at Penumbra in St. Paul. It was then done at the Oak Globe in San Diego, and I worked on it in those three productions. And and simultaneous with that, at the Oak Globe in San Diego, was done Barrington Stage, and that was weird because I was in San Diego working on the play there, and Barrington Stage, and I would email them my changes for the day, and they'd be in rehearsals. They're like, script's changing, and so and then only then did it come to New York, and so I really cut my teeth not in an academic environment, but I was thrown in the deep end with a paying audience from the very beginning, and I had to learn. It was all practicum, no theory. It was all just day one of rehearsal, opening night, audience, first preview, if you're lucky to have a preview at all in some of these theaters. And so I learned how to write for an audience because it's the only way I was, it's the only way I was taught. And And so, I did not have any bad habits beaten out of me other than by trial and error.
I love that. It's just because I think one of the problems I see in a lot of the scripts that I read is you can tell the writer is writing for themselves. They're like, isn't this great? Isn't this great? This is like, but you learn to write to get a response from an audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, I went through that phase too. Isn't this great? Isn't this great? And then when you're in front of an audience, as often as I was at the beginning of my career, they're very honest, and they'll say, no, in fact, it isn't. And here's why. And you know, and you learn a lot from your first walkout. I mean, it feels like a dagger to the heart, and like, you know, and you know, and I mean, look, one of my Stephen Daldry, one of his mantras is, I love being wrong. Oh, I love being wrong. And I don't love it as much as Stephen does, but I do understand it, and I have most decidedly learned from being wrong. It's a great teacher. Failure is a great teacher. And you know, what I would say is that because I was sort of cutting my teeth in front of a paying audience, the possibility for failure was very high. And so I couldn't afford to sort of write for myself. I mean, obviously everything I wrote was very personal and came from me, but no, I had to quickly burn off that whole, gee, aren't I clever, sort of writing that a lot of young writers go through. And they should go through that because, you know, you are clever, and you should enjoy that. But then it's when the audience stops enjoying it, then it behooves you to learn to stop writing that way. And so yeah, that was my shot out of a cannon. Really, it was my career, but a very long sail through the air before you actually landed somewhere.
Do you have a specific regimen or a process to your writing? Do you wake up at the same time every day? You write for 8 hours? You just write when it's the same location? Like, I'm always curious.
Yeah, I used to, for the longest time, I used to write at a writing space in Brooklyn I've been going there for 10 years, I think, and then. You know, now that I'm not in the city anymore, I write at my home, and I'm just in a little bedroom in my basement. I mean, it seems bleaker than it is. You know, life has changed now creatively for me because I live above the shop. You know, and a lot of writers work from home, but I was never able to do that. And I was really terrified that I couldn't do it because usually when I try to work from home, I end up with the world's cleanest kitchen, you know? And so I had to really just sort of like, I mean, I had to give myself a talking to. I was like, all right, Lopez, look, here's the deal. You want to create anything in the next year and a half, you better figure this out. And, you know, the funny thing is that I learned, and this is just, I can only speak for myself, but I actually used to write 8 hours a day. And, now I've learned that I don't need to, that I actually can get probably just as much and perhaps even better work done in less time. Look, I have the privilege of doing that because I'm in a place in my career where I can afford the time to do that, and that is a sort of a benefit. But that said, one of the things I learned very early on about writing is that it isn't precious. If you wait for the muse, you're never going to write. And there's really is, writer's block is just another word for fear. You know, you gotta write, and you just gotta get something down on paper, and you gotta treat it like a job. And so when I used to write at that writer space in Brooklyn, it was very easy to treat it like a job. I'd have a little lunch, I'd walk to my little writer space, I'd, you know, do everything but clock in, you know, and I'd write, and then I'd come home at the end of the day. But you know, here it's like still without getting to do that, I think it really is just a question of it's all right if what you write is bad. If you'll make it good. You know, I wouldn't turn it in bad, but you know, when it's so nascent and it's just sort of formless and it's just sort of it hasn't, you know, really formed into what it's going to be. It just like, I've learned to be gentle with myself, and I actually write first drafts very quickly. Like, I want to just like blaze through a first draft. I wrote the first draft of Inheritance Part 1 in 5 weeks. I just like, I I had it all mapped out. I had 3-act structure. I knew what every scene was about. I knew what every scene within a scene was about. It was the only time I've ever worked that sort of concrete sequentially. And I just mapped it out. And then I literally I made a list, a to-do list, and I just started like, right, because I knew that the real work for me, the way I write, the real work will happen as soon as it's done. When it's not done, but when it's all there, and I can actually read it. I won't know what I've got until I read it, so I work fast. I asked a question about 20 minutes ago, and I've ended up with this answer.
Now I have like a zillion more. So because I love that. It's just spitting out this first draft, just get it, because then you can shape it. So what percentage of it do you think remained or changed after you got that first draft out? Like how different is that first draft from what was at the theater?
It depends on the thing. The weird thing about Inheritance is a lot of that first draft was spoken by the actors on March 11th, or a version of it. And that, of course, if I were like my own teacher, I'd say, and that's what you get for properly preparing, and that's what you get for properly outlining, is that much of your first draft will remain, 5 years after the fact. I think that is a little more of a question of just knowing exactly what I wanted to write and writing exactly what I intend to write, which is a rare thing in a writer's career, and it was the first time it ever happened to me. There are other plays of mine where that first draft, you barely even recognize the play, after it goes through the rewriting process. I think the biggest thing on Inheritance really, especially on part 1, which sort of hews pretty closely to the plot of Howard's End, the biggest challenge on Inheritance for me in the rewriting was divorcing the language of E.M. Forster, divorcing the play from the language of E.M. Forster, and beginning to sort of assert its own language and moving inexorably away from its source material. One of the things that, when in talking about Inheritance, one of the things that people don't often sort of mention or think about is that it is an adaptation in many ways. And it's a very free form adaptation. It's like inspired by rather than adapted by. But, if you sat down and you look at the play and then you look at the book, a lot of the stuff that's in the play is, informed by the book. And I used a lot of, at the beginning, I relied on his structure, and I relied my first draft too much on his way of writing. And while the basic structure, especially in part 1, still held, the rewriting process was just allowing Eric to speak in his own. Toby spoke in his own voice from the beginning. Like Toby was just like, didn't have to search too far for Toby. He lived inside of my head every day. But Eric, who I think also lives inside of my head every day of my life, Eric had to be cajoled out, and Eric had to be sort of like teased out. And I think probably a lot of the process of rewriting the play was making sure that Eric was who he needed to be.
How are you staying positive during all this craziness right now? How are you keeping your factory pumping out product? Like, how are you staying up? The world is literally burning right now, literally, in California.
Look, it's hard, and you've caught me on a nice night. I think it's the thing that one of the things that I hope people find in the play is, look, a full life is not a life lived without tragedy. And right now we are all living sort of a simultaneous tragedy in our own different way, in our own different key. The pandemic, if that weren't enough, and then BIPOC communities are experiencing BIPOC communities right now are experiencing a kind of, well, I'm just going to jump right over it and say a hope. I mean, I think that's the answer. If the death of George Floyd had just been forgotten a week afterward, and we had just sort of moved on with our lives, then I think it would be a lot more tempting to just sort of live in anger and to live in hopelessness as a society. But I found an enormous amount of hope in the majority of Americans' response to it. I found a lot of hope in the way that so many Americans have responded to the pandemic. I found a lot of hope in the way people are responded to the nomination of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I would be a delusional person who doesn't live on the planet Earth if I sat here and said, everything's great, this is awesome. Yeah. No. This has been, without question, the most painful year of probably anyone's life. That said, I think what gets me up in the morning is I'm very hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful. I think that, one of the we're not supposed to trust polls anymore. And I don't, when it comes to the electorate and who they're going to vote for, I don't trust polls. One of the polls that gives me hope is that a vast majority of Americans look at the Black Lives Matter protests of this summer into this fall, and they agree with the message. They share sympathy with the message. I think Americans who needed to hear the message have started to hear the message. And I think that in the artistic community, in the New York community, the process of getting people to hear the message within our own community is just starting. And as a nation, when it comes to the way we talk about this pandemic and the way we talk about healthcare being a right, I mean, like, if anybody now has any doubt as to whether or not healthcare is a fundamental human right, this year has disabused them of that. Mm-hmm. And so, look, I'm the person who wrote The Inheritance, and what The Inheritance is about is, how do you move on from an unimaginable tragedy? How does a community rebuild? How does a nation rebuild? It has to, it must, or else it won't. And I carry that hope with me. I'm very hopeful. I know it's a little Pollyannish, and I'm not at all ignorant of what stands in the way. But what I will say is, there is no better time for hope than in times of despair. It's easy to have hope when things are great. It's absolutely easy to have hope when things are great. To have hope through despair is the true definition of hope. And that's where I live right now.
Well, it's a wonderful place to live, and there's no question in my mind that you are the success that you are because of that hope that you've had, that gratitude that you talked about at the beginning, and that positive spirit. I'm so thankful that you've been here with us tonight and sharing all these wonderful insights, both into writing and into life. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for spending so much time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I look forward to doing it in person.
Yes, one day.
Yes, we shall. Thanks so much for being here, Matthew. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Matthew Lopez, everybody. For those of you who don't know this, on my Instagram, I put quotes on my board, my morning whiteboard quote. They're usually inspirational. I now can do like the Matthew Lopez sessions. We'll have one for 4 weeks. There were so many unbelievable insights from that conversation. So I thank him so much for being with us tonight. We put up a hard copy, a photo of the hard copy of The Inheritance. Go grab that play if you didn't get a chance to see it, but go read it. It is a brilliant, brilliant piece of work. What's up next week? Don't forget Will Swenson next week. Will Swenson will be with us next week. We'll talk about what he's been doing during this pandemic. Don't forget about the Actors Fund. That's why we're here. We saw some stars. I was just so intoxicated by every word that Matthew was saying. All of a sudden someone threw us 50 stars. I was like, oh, right. We're also raising money. Thank you for doing that. So do support the Actors Fund if you can. This thing is going on a little bit longer than any one of us had ever expected, which means the Actors Fund is going to need you to help replenish their funds. Okay, so please do that. And now I'm going to go out with, like we always do, something to make you smile. Something to make you smile. Here's a video, one that is near and dear to my heart because it's a song from Godspell, the first show I ever produced on Broadway. And it's Beautiful City, which they added to it. This one is by T3 and Nicholas Edwards. What makes it unique? T3 is a special a cappella group, and Nicholas is playing Jesus right now. He's in one of the few theatrical productions currently operating in the world at the Berkshire Theater Group. And guess what? I'm going to see it this Saturday. I cannot wait. I'm going to see how they're doing it socially distanced and all. And I just can't wait to hear songs like this live. I hope it makes you smile and it reminds you that we will rebuild this beautiful city known as the theater. And I can't wait to see you all in the theater again soon and to see you next week right here on the live stream. Thanks so much, everybody. Stay tuned for this video.
Out of the ruins and rubble, out of the smoke, out of our night of struggle, can we see a ray of hope? One pale thin ray reaching for the day we can build a beautiful city. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Oh, we can build a beautiful city. Not a city of angels, but we can build a city of man. Build a city of man. When your trust is all but shattered, when your faith is all but killed, you can give up better and better, or you can slowly start to build a beautiful city. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.